Welcome. Today we're going to be presenting Darkness to Lights, Protecting Children from Sex Trafficking. Ending child sexual abuse takes a cooperative community effort. Preventing child sexual abuse addresses the root cause of many social problems like violent crime, homelessness, teen pregnancy, health problems, and substance use problems. Eliminating this child sexual abuse will lead to a healthier, happier world. As a steward of children, you are a driver of this vision. In this training today, you will recognize what sex trafficking is, in what circumstances make children vulnerable. You'll be able to examine the root causes and impact of sex trafficking through the stories of two survivors. You'll be able to interpret how preventing child sexual abuse reduces the risk for children being commercially sexually exploited. And you'll be able to describe actions adults can take to prevent commercial sexual exploitation of children. So how is child sexual abuse and commercial sexual exploitation of children related? First of all, 90% of children who are trafficked in the sex trade have been victims of child sexual abuse before that. The other thing is the objectification of treating another person like an object. Child sexual abuse material or pornography that objectifies children and normalizes child sexual abuse feeds the demand for sex trafficking. So what exactly is sex trafficking? Sex trafficking is any sexual activity involving an individual for which something of value is given or promised. How big is the problem? Well, most recently in 2020, there were more than 17,000 reports of possible sex child trafficking in the United States. There are 5 steps to protecting children from child sexual abuse. Consequences to children and to our society begin immediately upon any sexual abuse. The 5 steps are: first, to learn the facts; second, to minimize opportunity; third is to talk about it; fourth, recognize the signs; and fifth, react responsibly. Let's take a look at an introduction video.
Commercial sexual exploitation of children is a complex problem, and interventions are needed in almost every level of our society. The extent of those interventions is beyond the scope of this training. However, this training will show us how profoundly sexual abuse and the objectification of children in our society are root causes of commercial sexual exploitation of children. When we take steps to prevent child sexual abuse, we are also preventing one of the most heinous crimes against our children.
Commercial sexual exploitation is sexual activity involving a child where there is the promise of something of value or the exchange of something of value, which could be money, it could be shelter, it could be food, it could be consumer goods like a cell phone, it could be something as simple as just taking a child shopping or getting their hair done or their nails done.
You are able to purchase the rape of a child. That's what CSEC is.
Commercial sexual exploitation is child sexual abuse with a commercial arrangement, children being sexually abused for money or for something else of value. We know that more than 90% of children who are commercially sexually exploited were first sexually abused as children.
The connection between child sexual abuse and sexual exploitation is really profound. Almost all of our girls have had a history of sexual abuse in the past. It's because of, the boundaries being blurred, learning that you can't trust anybody, that you have to hold these secrets. The lessons that you learn about your body being a sexual object something that is commodified. Through the grooming process, you're facing escalating abuse, escalating violence. It's, being alternated with rewards. Your uncle comes over, you sit on, he asks you to sit on his lap, you sit on his lap, he gives you love, and that feels really good. And then the next day he comes over, you sit on his lap, he gives you love, and that feels really good, but then he puts his hand on your leg, right? Then you go out for ice cream. The next day he comes over, you sit on his lap, he puts his hand a little bit further up your leg, you go out for ice cream after. So when it actually, crosses the line and it becomes very traumatic, a child is going to kind of disassociate from that experience and just look forward to the rewards. And I see that pattern repeating with the girls later.
This is something that normally happens at a very young age. So children start linking the concepts of abuse with love, with sex. They're being taught at a very young age to be sexualized, and they start viewing themselves as sex objects. Their psychological and physical boundaries are being violated, and they start seeing the world as an unsafe place where it's difficult to trust others, where they feel that they have no control over their bodies, that maybe others have control over their bodies. So it really puts it at a high risk later on in life to be sexually exploited, because they're already being taught to be this person, to be sexualized, to act in a sexual manner when they're being sexually abused.
We have a massive legal pornography market in our world. And in the legal adult pornography, there are many depictions of children and teens as sexual objects and commodities. So that is saying it is normal to be sexually aroused by children and teens. There's incest sites, there's rape sites, there's barely legal sites. It feeds the demand for children as sexual objects and commodities. So it takes away barriers for somebody who's going to perpetrate, whether that's a father, a stepfather, a brother, a neighbor, a coach, a priest, because they can justify their faulty thinking and their excuses for sexually abusing that child.
We also know that those who perpetrate child sexual abuse are increasingly participating in commercial sexual exploitation and trafficking of children. As you take this training, consider the impact child sexual abuse prevention can have to prevent commercial sexual exploitation of children.
Child sexual abuse makes children more vulnerable to sexual exploitation. The patterns created by unaddressed child sexual abuse increase the risks and are illustrated by the experiences of survivors. There are a number of lessons that we've learned from survivor stories. The first being blurred boundaries. Boundaries being blurred makes it difficult for the child to understand what is or isn't appropriate for someone to do. A lack of trust would be the second. The messages from the abusive encounter that the child has tell the child that they can't trust anyone. Secrets would be a third lesson that we've learned. And the abuser manipulates with threats and or rewards to keep secrets from their parents or trusted adults. Sexual objectification. Children learn lessons about their body being a sexual object, something that is commoditized. And the last is alternating rewards and violations. Abusers use a tactic of exacting abuse and escalating violence, alternated with rewards to the child. Let's take a look at a video. As you watch this video, consider the similarities in Holly and Keisha's story. How does child sexual abuse create a higher risk for commercial sexual exploitation of children?
Are you ready to learn the facts about CSEC? You will meet two survivors of commercial sexual exploitation who were first sexually abused as children. Sexual abuse itself is damaging, but when a child must cope with it alone, without intervention, that pain can set up patterns and circumstances that make them highly vulnerable to being sexually exploited and trafficked.
I was born to a schizophrenic mother. She was not able to care for me because of her mental illness. I stayed with her until I was 4, and just the neglect and the abandonment and having to be raised by my other brothers and sisters, it didn't work out. So I was placed with my aunt. My aunt was a very strict disciplinary. I grew up in church. I would say it became very physically abusive in her household. Then at the age of 4, I started to be sexually abused by some adult cousins who were also in the household. I did not tell because I was threatened by my cousins, and as a child, you don't know that that is wrong.
So there was a cousin who was sexually abusing me. What was more traumatic about the experience for me was feeling helpless. It was, I would beg my parents not to leave me at this house, but they would go out for the weekend, and so they would leave me there as a babysitter. And for some reason, as a child, you don't speak up about those things. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I wasn't so sure that it was right or wrong. I just knew that I didn't like it, and I didn't want it to happen anymore. So I would beg not to be left there. And then I would be left there, and I would know it was going to happen, and I would just be so angry. And then everybody would go to sleep, and I would just wait for him to come. And out of that situation was born of just a deep anger in me, a resentment towards adults, towards caretakers, the people in charge. And I also didn't understand that he didn't have the right to do this to me.
The first time that I ran away, I was 5. And I was with my brother, and he told me that he knew how to get to my mom's house. I still love my mom. I didn't know what crazy was. I didn't know all these labels that they had put on her. And I ran away, and it felt like freedom. We were gone for like 4 or 5 hours, and it just felt like I was free. And so whenever something became too hard for me or something became very scary, I would just run.
I began to realize that what was happening to me on the weekends was not normal. But I was so stressed out by my cousin, who by this point, my parents finally agreed not to leave me there, but they invited him to be the babysitter because he volunteered. So then it was happening in the home. And I was very, very stressed out. And I started to have like anxiety tics. And I thought I was going crazy. At like age 9 or 10, I literally thought I was going crazy.
And at the age of 12, I started acting out, became very violent and disruptive, went through juvenile court, was placed in juvenile. And I did not know that I was reacting off of the abuse that I was experiencing.
So I went to my mom and I told her what was going on. And it was very difficult for me to tell her, but she understood, and she said that he would never come over here again. He would never babysit again. I would never go over there. I wouldn't see him at all. But she told me never to speak of it again. So I was left feeling glad that the abuse was going to stop, but I was also left feeling confused. Like, did I do something wrong? Is this somehow my fault? Did I invite this?
I had come home from school, and I had left some toothpaste in the sink from earlier that morning, and she blacked my eye. And I remember out of a reflex, I hit her back. And I was so ashamed, I just ran out the house. And about an hour or so later, I came back, and the police was there. And they took me to juvenile court because I had hit an adult. And that was my first contact with the law enforcement. So at a very young age, I became did not trust law enforcement at all, because I was in a situation where I felt that I had been victimized, and yet I was the criminal.
A social worker came to school and gave the good touch, bad touch talk. And I said, oh, I think this is a great idea, what y'all are doing. You know, there's lots of kids out there that need this, because this happened to me in the past. And so, of course, everything sort of stopped after that. And they took a lot of interest in what I was saying, and they started asking me a lot of questions. And then I realized I had made a mistake. And then when I started to clam up, they said, we have to go home and confront your parents about this, which threw me into a panic, because like I said, at home, we do not talk about issues. We don't take issues outside of the home. So I went home and I told them what I had done, and they were very angry, and they told me to lie about it, to say that I was lying. And so the social workers showed up that night, and they stood at the door and they asked questions, and I said I had made the whole thing up. And then from that day forward, just that anger that I had inside from the abuse came forward. And I didn't have the knowledge or strength or understanding to talk about my abuse, but I understood how to be angry about it. And I showed that anger to my teachers, to my parents, to everyone around me. I changed. I became a different kid.
And then I was placed into foster care. From the age of 12 to 16, I had been placed in 42 different placements where I either ran away or I wasn't perfect enough. If I acted out once, I was sent back to defects. So I realized then that you had to be perfect in order to fit in, and I was never perfect or enough for these homes.
I was trying very hard to fit in with this bully-some crowd, and they bullied me, and I became a bully to try to fit in with them. And I wound up being sexually assaulted by a few of the men or older teen boys in the group. But because I never got counseling for the early childhood sexual abuse, I didn't really understand what my personal boundaries were or what other people's rights were to my body. So when these assaults happened, I didn't understand that I could say, hey, I've just been assaulted, someone come help me. Because the last time I did that, it didn't go over well. I think it's so important to teach girls like sexual empowerment and positive sexual health. What is a healthy relationship, and what is a sexual assault versus, I thought I had, what is it called? A one-night stand. That's what I equated this experience with, and it was actually a sexual assault on me.
At the age of 16, I became a teenage mom without any resources to provide for myself. I could not provide for my daughter. I sent her to stay with her father, and I was devastated because I felt that not only did my mom not raise me, now I am repeating that. I cannot raise my child. And I've always wanted to be the best mom because I knew how it felt to be motherless. And a social worker told me that I did not have anywhere else to go, that the next placement would be a mental institution. And at that point, that was not an option for me. I felt like I was not crazy. I felt someone had failed me somehow. I just did not know who, or maybe I failed myself. I could not answer those questions. And I ran away from the last placement.
The manipulation and grooming process of child sexual abuse can set the stage for CSEC. When these patterns are not addressed, children are more vulnerable to commercial sexual exploitation. How can you prevent child sexual abuse?
So becoming a target of commercial sexual exploitation of children We find that the average age of victims who are lured or forced into exploitation is between 12 and 14 years of age. Consider the vulnerability and insecurity of children at that age. Traffickers or pimps are skilled at targeting a vulnerable child and manipulating that child into, quote unquote, the life. Children who have been sexually abused have a greater risk of manipulation since they have already experienced those patterns of abuse. Sometimes there are signs a child is being groomed for exploitation, and sometimes there are multiple people involved in luring the child into exploitation. Let's take another look at a video.
As you continue to listen to Keisha and Holly's story, consider how a child can be coerced into being sexually exploited. Would you be able to recognize the signs of CSEC?
It always kind of pulls on my heart every time I have to talk about the age, but the average age of entry is 12 to 14 years old. And I've worked with a handful of 11-year-olds. When they're 11 years old and they come into your office and they're holding a teddy bear and sucking their thumb, that really kills you because you know that they're out there and police are arresting them for prostitution. And it doesn't make any sense.
So we were walking in the mall and I'm straggling behind my friends and I was really looking into the faces of strangers. I was looking for some sort of a connection. But then I noticed that there was this guy staring at me. And when I waited for him to look away, he motioned for me to come over to him. And he was still staring at me and my friends were still ignoring me and I thought, I want to know what he wants.
So I reached out to my godmother who had helped raise me. And I told her that I needed someone to go and she was like, no, you can't come here. You've been here before and it had not worked out. And she said that someone is trying to contact you, a childhood friend of yours from church. So she gave me the girl's number and I called her. And I told her, I'm on the run. I don't have anywhere to go. I'm hungry. And I feel like I'm about to die. So my friend reached out to me and she said, you can come to my house. I went to her house. And of course I couldn't stay there. Her mom said that I couldn't stay. But my friend told me she knew someone who could help me out.
So we exchanged numbers and he started calling me that night. And we talked for about 2 weeks. And he didn't come on strong, like sexually or pushing me to run away. He was just like a friend.
They are psychological masterminds, these pimps, at picking that thing out of that particular girl, her weakness, targeting, honing in on that, and plucking her out and bringing her into their life.
He started to get to know my interests, maybe my weaknesses, what made me tick, what made me worry. And he told me things like I was pretty enough to be a model, which I didn't believe, but it was really nice to hear. I was infatuated with MTV musicians, and I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a songwriter, and I wanted to be musicians. So he said that he knew musicians all over the country and that he could take me to famous cities and he could get me into famous dance clubs and I could become an actress or a songwriter. And by the end of the 2 weeks, it sounded like a great idea. What I didn't know at that time was that the person that I had been talking to for the past 2 weeks was a completely different man from the guy at the mall. In my case files, I learned that there was another guy who spent that time with me on the phone, and that makes a lot of sense to me now because when I showed up at the mall to meet the guy again, he was very different. He was not friendly. He was very withdrawn and authoritative, and I was very nervous around him, and I thought I had done something wrong. Never did I think it was a completely different person. I thought that I had run away wrong.
So when she took me to a strip club, I really wasn't aware of what this type of place was. I didn't put 2 and 2 together. At 16, you never put 2 and 2 together. And she introduced me to this guy, and he said his name was Sir Charles. And at that point, that was not a red flag for me. He was an older guy in his 50s, kind of like a grandfather type. He did not have the qualities of in my mind, the Hollywood version of a trafficker. He didn't have the gold chains or the flashy suits, or he didn't have on the cane or the big hat, and he did not speak in riddles. So I did not say pimp or trafficker. He looked at me and he said, "Wow, you're beautiful." And that was the first time that anyone had ever said that I was beautiful. I didn't feel beautiful, especially not that day. And he told me, "Let's go for a ride." I rode with him. We rode around the city. And for the first time in my life, I felt like he had unlocked something inside of me. I told him about my sexual abuse. I told him about my aunt and how I had got up until this point. And it felt like I had released. And he looked at me, he said, "You don't have to live like that." He said, "You're beautiful. You don't have to be homeless. You don't have to keep going in and out these systems. I know a way for you to provide for yourself." And the next thing that he did, he took me to pick up my daughter, and we took her to the park. And for the first time, I felt like this is somebody who's trying to help me. Everybody else looked at my behavior or what I was doing. This person took me to get my daughter, and that was very important to me.
Actually, first he took me to a store to buy hair dye. He bought a couple of bottles of hair dye. And then he took me to a shoe store, and he picked out a pair of red high heels. And he asked the sales lady if they had them any smaller than size 7, because I was a size 5. And they didn't. And the sales girl looked at me, and I think that it was obvious that something was awry. As I was leaving the shoe store, I ran into an elementary school friend and her mom, who I recognized right away, and they recognized me because we were close. And she took one look at me and one look at the person I was with, and she pulled my friend Danielle into the store because it was clear something was amiss, I think.
And he took me back to his house after we dropped my daughter off. And there were like 9 other girls. Some were younger than me. No one was over 18. And I felt a connection with these girls because they welcomed me in. And a lot of people say that the lifestyle these girls live in is glamorized. I think what attracted me most was the family unit, because I've never had a family before, and that felt really good to me, to feel like I belong somewhere.
Some of the things that keep them in the life are the fact that when they're at home, their stepdad may come into their room every night, every other night, and rape them, day in and day out. But at least when they're with their pimp, they may have to have sex with different men day in and day out, but at least he's getting their hair done. At least they know when it's coming. At least they know that there's some commonality with the other girls they have to endure it with, and that it's not just that knock at the door at night.
Traffickers target children by learning their likes, dislikes, and insecurities. They use compliments and bribes to fill a need in the child's life. Many children are lured into commercial sexual exploitation because, unlike their former home, this new environment has a false sense of belonging, consistency.
So it has been found that buyers often want, quote unquote, young. Because of the high demand, the price for sexually exploiting a child is higher than the price of an adult prostitute. Child sexual abuse material is child sexual abuse. It is illegal to produce or possess child sexual abuse material. Child sexual abuse material is any form of media that shows sexual activity with a child. This would include writings, video, magazines, photos, sculptures, drawings, cartoons, animations, sound recordings, or video games. In the following video, you will hear more about the grooming process and how different people can be responsible for perpetrating this crime.
What are the patterns that can be created by unaddressed child sexual abuse that can make a child vulnerable to commercial sexual exploitation later?
So from there, this guy took me to a motel, and there was a woman there who also looked like she was in her early 20s, maybe 18, 19 too. She was beautiful. And then this woman took over and she turned on MTV and she's talked to me about music, and she pulled out her clothes, and it was girl time, and she bonded with me, and I bonded with her immediately because that's what I was looking for.
And later that night, he took me back to the strip club where I had met him. And he told me that I would have to dance. And I saw other girls. These girls were beautiful. These girls, they were half clothed, but they were beautiful. And they were making money. And that was attractive to me because I needed money. And it looked like they were in control of the situation because no one was touching them against their will. If a girl said stop, the guy stopped, and it seemed like there were boundaries.
The pimp came back after a couple of hours, and he said he had to go over the rules with me. I have to take $200 an hour, talk to this kind of guy, that kind of guy. He gave me a new name, a new birthday. From a very early age, back to the early childhood sexual abuse, I learned to be complacent to those around me, to sort of deal with what was happening to me. I never learned to fight.
I often compare it to Alice in Wonderland. I'm going about my business, and all of a sudden I fall down this hole, and I'm in this world that I never knew existed. And it's very scary and very attractive at the same time. That day I felt like I was letting myself down because I had been raised with morals, and I felt like this is not right. But at the same time, I need to do this in order to survive. And Sir Charles said that he would protect me, and I'm trusting him at this point.
And looking back, I believe we were in a section that was known for child prostitutes because a guy came along and picked me up so quickly. He walked past us and asked me how old I was, and he began to haggle with the woman. I didn't say very much. They haggled on a price. She told him to get a car, pick me up directly, take me directly to a hotel. And in the hotel room, he told me that I reminded him of his granddaughter. So I think he knew what he was looking for. He knew that there were children out there, and that's what he was looking for.
The price goes up for a child victim, and I'll put it as bluntly and correctly as I can, if I will. A child's figure, a child's body is going to be oftentimes more appealing to a male buyer than, say, a woman who's been in the life, and say she's only 30 years old, but she's been in the life for 15, 16 years. Her body's been just run rampant through, either by the sexual abuse that she's endured, the drug abuse that she's endured. And so a 15-year-old is obviously way more physically appealing to a male than, say, the 30-year-old who's been through it. And
I'm in the car with him, and he tells me all these things that I have to do, how much I have to charge. He tells me that I have to make $1,000, and all these things that I'm running through my head. And I tell him, no, I'm not doing those things. I told him that I was comfortable with the dancing. If I couldn't dance, then I wouldn't do anything else. He looked me in my eyes and he told me, oh, you'll do it. He said, "You know that little girl you introduced me to?" He said that I'll make sure something happens to her. And I had saw him the previous night be violent to one of the other girls. And at that time, I did not want to challenge him.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, this is as degrading as you can get to a woman. What you have to make her feel, what you have to make her value herself at, so that she will participate in these acts. Not only will she sacrifice her entire body to the life, but then turn over all the proceeds to you and have no financial benefit or gain from it other than what you allow her to have as her pimp.
I had experienced early childhood sexual abuse. I had experienced sexual assault without really understanding it was sexual assault in middle school. I felt like men or older boys felt like they had the right to touch me and to take advantage of me, and I didn't feel like I was strong enough to say no. I, honest to God, didn't understand that I had the right to say no. So what this man and woman offered to me, even though it's not what I signed up for, he said, "You're going to do this now, and you're going to take $200 an hour." And I thought that empowered me. I actually felt empowered because now at least I wasn't walking into a situation not knowing what was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen, and I knew that it didn't mean anything except that I would be paid and that I could work towards getting to Hollywood to become a songwriter.
Traffickers manipulate using intimidation, threats, and abuse. They emotionally control children by strategically taking away the child's former identity. These are all elements of the grooming process.
So who are the buyers of this child sexual abuse material? Buyers have financial resources to pay for sex with children. Most buyers are male, often married, in positions of leadership in the community, from all different backgrounds in all different professions. Child sexual abuse and commercial sexual exploitation is often about power and not the sex. Let's take a look at another video that will explain more about who the buyers are.
We've learned about the ways traffickers manipulate and abuse children. The buyers are also guilty of child sexual abuse. While the roles they play are different, they both contribute to the abuse of children.
The people that are involved in paying for the services from these young girls, in my experience so far, has been white males, most married, between the ages of 35 and 45, all different kind of backgrounds and professions, all kind of education levels.
These are people who are our neighbors. They're people in our churches. They are people who are in law enforcement. They are people who are in positions of leadership. You have to think about, if you are going to buy sex from a 14-year-old child and it will cost you $200-300 for an hour, you have to have disposable income. So this is going to be the higher income individuals that are coming to buy sex from the girls. Yes, will there be some individuals who are from lower income who are buyers? Absolutely, that's happening. But when it comes to buying sex from an underage girl, the price goes up, and so then does the income of the buyer.
The police rode up and he shone this big bright light on me. And although I was ashamed because I was half clothed, I felt he's going to rescue me. Now it's my time to escape. And I knew that Sir Charles was only a block away watching the whole thing. And he told me that if I got arrested, all the things that law enforcement would do and how embarrassing it would be. And he told me to say that I was waiting for someone if I got pulled over. And so the police shine this light on me and he says, "Hey, you, what are you doing out here?" And I tell him I'm waiting on someone. And he says, "You don't belong out here. You belong on Peachtree Street where the pretty girls are." And I was lost for words. Like, I realized that this officer did not see me as a child. He did not see me as a human who's been bought and sold. He sees me as a prostitute and giving me other options or locations to go to be more profitable. And I think I lost respect for law enforcement at that time.
I actually thought that I was empowered until the following day when the pimp raped me. And again, when that happened, I felt like it was my fault. I was the one who chose to run away. This is the life that I have now, and I have to deal with it.
Later that night when I went home, Sir Charles, he took me into his bedroom and he handcuffed me to his bed, and I was face down, and I did not have a shirt on, and he had a belt, and he hit me across my back in this. He hit me across my back in the shape of an X, and I had like whips on my back, and he told me that, he said that from now on you have no choices. Because I had told him no, he said you have no choices, and he named me Choicey, and that was my street name, and that was how that was given to me. And I felt hopeless, and I felt like I didn't have any choices after that moment.
These things are not just about sex, they're also about power, right? Johns are buying sex not because they're poor men that can't get sex because they're, ugly or antisocial or whatever. In general, a lot of men are buying sex because they like the power of being able to purchase sex and have that person do whatever you want them to do, right? So this idea of the power is what plays into child sexual abuse. It plays into sexual assaults and rapes. And this is, I think that to make any kinds of changes, you have to really take a look at that.
Understanding what motivates people to abuse children can help prevent child sexual exploitation.
So what does it take to prevent sex trafficking of children? Children are exploited because of the demand. As a society, we need to protect children from sexual harm. All adults have a role in preventing sexual abuse by minimizing the opportunity for abuse. Part of the prevention is stopping the normalization of the objectification of children. Some examples of minimizing opportunities for commercial sexual exploitation of children would include: don't consume child sexual abuse material or anything glorifying child exploitation. Challenge the media that sexuality degrades and objectifies. Don't support companies that profit from exploiting children. Express child protection values openly, and report any suspicious activity involving children. Remember, using the 5 steps to protecting children from exploitation helps to save children. Learn the facts. 90% of all children who are commercially sexually exploited were first sexually abused. Minimize the opportunity for commercial sexual exploitation by considering the role that media plays in objectifying children. Talk about it. Express your child protection values and views openly by talking about this training and the concepts you have learned today. Recognize the elements of the grooming process. Your recognition of the grooming process could save a child's life. And react responsibly. Report any suspicious behaviors. Please remember that this is an emergency issue and 911 would be the party that you would contact. Let's take a look at our last video clip.
Consider the role media plays in objectifying children. How can you work to prevent child sexual abuse in your community?
You have to realize that if there's no demand for these children, there would never be a supply. Because in my mind, I view a world where there are no more victims. We can create these programs. We can create outreach programs or rescue programs. But if we go upstream and we focus on because I often ask myself, why was it that I was trafficked? Was it because I was a runaway? Being a runaway put me more at risk. It did, but that's not why I was trafficked. I was not trafficked because I met Sir Charles. That alone could not have trafficked me. I was trafficked because the first time that I was put out on the street, a buyer approached me and propositioned me. That is why I was trafficked, because there was a demand for a child. And bottom line, I was trafficked because someone purchased me.
And that to me is the very essence of this problem. It's not just for the criminal justice system to deal with. It's not just for the services industry to deal with. It's not just for these groups who have the specialized training. We need to take this head on as society.
Number one, don't consume it. Don't be the demand. Don't be the man out there buying sex. Don't be consuming, pornography. And as a man, you can't be afraid to stand up and say, I'm not okay with going to a strip club for a business event.
I think it's going to take men talking to men to say, listen, this is not acceptable. I know that it's always been coined as the world's oldest profession, and then that somehow we make it seem like it's the girl's fault. If it wasn't available, then the men wouldn't partake, or whatever nonsense they may use to justify their actions. But it really does take for groups of men to get together to say, listen, it doesn't matter what we may have thought before, but we, as men in our society, owe it to our children to protect them and to no longer engage in this type of activity. That needs to take place in our churches. It needs to take place in our schools. It needs to take place all over where men are gathered.
If somebody sees a young girl that kind of looks out of place or out of context with somebody else, like, just that gut feeling that somebody might have, that something might look suspicious, is a perfect opportunity just to make that phone call, let the hotel know, or let the police know that, I see something that looks a little bit strange. I see a couple of young girls with a guy that doesn't appear to be a parent. Don't just stand there and be a bystander. Take some action on it. There's nothing wrong with that.
We have to be able to, challenge kind of the way that the media represents women and the sex industry as well. Recognizing and letting people know that this is a situation that's a very serious and tragic situation for people that are involved. This is not something that should be joked, ridiculed, dehumanized. These are real people.
Part of what we now understand as a prevention strategy is to hold companies accountable that are profiting from this. For example, in our community, the big sports stadium is very popular, and the big line of the light rail comes right in by it, surrounded by businesses that profit from the sexual exploitation of women, commonly known as strip clubs. Little boys and girls walk with their family by all of those businesses, and in fact it says, bring in your ticket on game day for a free lap dance. What is the message to our boys and girls, to our families going to a sporting event where you cannot escape that? It's that it's normal. And what any police officer will tell you is where women are being sold, children are being sold. So there's active sexual abuse of children going on one level. But if you allow this market to go on, it feeds the normalization.
This isn't victimless, number one. This does affect everybody. and it has the potential to knock at your front door, whether it's on the demand side, whether it's on the supply side, whether it's your resources that are going out to protect and save these girls. It's going to affect everybody. And so, yes, it is going to cause us to evolve as a society, just like we have done hundreds of times before, whether it came to enslavement based on skin color, whether it came to enslavement based on socioeconomic class. Now it's the enslavement of our children. And we have to be aware of that, and we have to do something to change that.
Commercial sexual exploitation of children is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we're all involved. We can disrupt supply when we protect children from sexual abuse as a first line of defense. We can learn the facts about how child sexual abuse takes place to better prevent and lobby against it. We can eliminate isolated one-on-one interactions with children. We can talk with children, empower them, and help reinforce their boundaries. We can recognize signs and reach out to kids who show those signs. And we can react responsibly to child sexual abuse or suspicion of abuse. We need to shake up the demand side by speaking up and fighting against all forms of sexual exploitation and degradation. We can refuse media that objectifies. We can pull our support from companies that profit from sexually exploiting children. And we can express our values of protecting children openly. We can end child sexual abuse and exploitation in all its forms. This is another way in which we are stewards of children.
Remember, the most likely reason children are trafficked for sex is that there is a high demand for child sexual material. We can prevent commercial sexual exploitation and trafficking of children by challenging the media that sexually degrades and objectifies people, by pulling our financial support from companies that exploit children's sexuality, by reporting suspicious activity to law enforcement, and preventing childhood sexual abuse. If you have further questions, please feel free to contact us at the Family Support Center of Barry County.